Every morning, just before the sun fully rose, the park looked almost empty. The air was cold, quiet, and still most people were still asleep, wrapped in warm blankets, unaware that life was already moving quietly outside on the same wooden bench. Near the old oak tree, a dog sat perfectly still. He was not young, his fur was slightly unkempt, his eyes tired but alert, and every single morning he sat there, waiting. No one knew how long he had been alone. Some said he appeared just before winter started. Others believed he had been there much longer. Simply unnoticed, he never barked, never chased birds, never begged for food. He just sat. People passed by sometimes. Joggers with headphones, parents rushing with their children. A few would slow down, look at him, then keep walking. Some thought he belonged to someone nearby. Others assumed he would eventually leave, but he didn't. Every day he returned to the same bench, and every day he looked toward the path leading into the park, as if he expected someone to appear. His tail never wagged wildly, his body never jumped with excitement. It was the kind of waiting that comes from deep loss, not hope, but memory. Across the park, an elderly man walked slowly toward the same bench. His steps were careful, measured. He leaned slightly on a cane, his shoulders curved by time and years of solitude. He lived alone now. His house was quiet, too quiet. Every morning he came to the park because staying inside reminded him of everything he had lost. Man noticed the dog on the bench weeks ago. At first he kept his distance. He didn't want to get attached, but slowly, day after day, their routines began to align. The man sat on the far end of the bench. The dog stayed on the other. They never touched. They never spoke, at least not out loud, but something passed between them. In the silence, a shared understanding. Loneliness recognizes loneliness. The man started bringing a small piece of bread, not for the birds, for the dog, would place it carefully between them, then pull his hand back. The dog never rushed for eyes, waited only. When the man nodded slightly, would the dog lean forward and eat. This became their ritual. No words, no promises, just presence. And for a while, that was enough. But winter doesn't wait for anyone. As the days grew colder, the man's walks became slower, his breath heavier, his pauses longer. The dog noticed. He watched more closely. Now his ears stayed alert. His body leaned subtly toward the man. One morning, the frost was thicker than usual. The bench was icy, the wind sharper. The man sat down and didn't move. Minutes passed. The dog looked at him. The man's hands trembled, his breathing shallow. Something was wrong. The dog stood up. He nudged the man's knee gently. No response. He nudged again, harder this time. The man swayed slightly, and then he slumped. The dog stayed on that bench long after the man was taken away. Park slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Joggers passed by. Mother pushed a stroller along the path. Birds landed briefly on the empty bench and flew away again. But the dog did not move. He sat exactly where the old man had been sitting, his body still pressed against the spot where warmth had once been. Every now and then, he lifted his head, not to beg, not to bark, just to look. He watched the path the ambulance had taken. He watched every stranger who came close. He watched the sun climb higher into the sky. Hours passed by. Midday. The frost had melted from the grass. The bench was no longer cold, but the dog stayed. A park worker noticed him first. The man approached slowly, careful not to scare him. He crouched down a few feet away and spoke softly. "Hey, buddy, where's your owner?" The dog did not respond. The man reached out his hand. The dog leaned forward slightly, sniffed, then returned to his place, just waiting. The park worker tried again later. He placed a small container near the bench and stepped back. The dog looked at it then. He looked back at the path. He did not eat. By evening, more people had noticed. A young couple stopped and whispered to each other. An older woman stood at a distance, watching with tears in her eyes. Someone took a photo. Someone posted it online. Dog Waits on park bench all day, after elderly man taken away by ambulance at first. It was just a few likes, but the image was powerful. A lonely Dogan, empty bench, golden light at dusk by nightfall. Thousands of people had seen it still. The dogs stayed when darkness fell and the temperature dropped again. The park lights turned on one by one. The dog curled up slightly. But he did not leave that night. It rained cold. Steady rain. The bench became wet. The ground turned muddy. The dog shifted closer to the backrest, trying to shield himself from the wind, but he stayed early the next morning. A volunteer from a nearby animal shelter arrived. She had seen the post. She approached slowly. Carrying a blanket and a leash, she spoke gently. Kneeling near the bench, "You don't have to stay out here." She whispered, "He's safe now." Dog looked at her. Then he looked at the bench. She waited minutes past finally. The dog stood up for the first time since the ambulance left. He stepped away from the bench, but instead of walking toward her, he turned back. He placed his paw on the bench then. Another, as if asking permission. Volunteer swallowed hard. She did not pull the leash. She waited. The dog stood there for a long moment then. Slowly, he stepped down. He followed Hare out the shelter. The dog barely reacted to anything. Other dogs barked. People moved around. Him doors opened and closed, but his eyes stayed. Distant he ate when food was placed directly in front of him. He drank when the bowl was brought close, but he did not explore at night. He laid down near the door, as if expecting someone to walk through it. Days passed. The photo continued to spread. Local news picked up the story. Faithful dog waits for elderly owner after medical. Emergency reporters came. They asked the shelter staff questions. Do you know who the man is? Is there any way to reunite them? At first, there were no answers. The man had no ID on him when he collapsed. No phone, no emergency contact. Just a name stitched faintly inside his coat. A dog who refused to forget him then. One afternoon, the shelter phone rang. A nurse from a local hospital was on the line. She had seen the story. She recognized the man. He's stable, she said. He's been asking about his dog. The room went silent. The shelter staff exchanged looks. They asked one question. What's the dog's name? Then the nurse answered. His name is Milo. At the sound of the name, the dog lifted his head for the first time since arriving at the shelter. His ears perked up. Someone tried it again. Milo. The dog stood up. He walked toward the voice. Milo. His tail moved. Plans were made immediately. Doctors agreed to allow a short visit the next morning. The volunteer drove slowly to the hospital. Milo sat in the back seat, quiet but alert as the building came into view. He pressed his nose to the window inside the hospital room. The old man lay in bed, weaker, thinner, but alive. He stared at the door, his hands trembling when it opened. He held his breath. Milo? The dog froze, then everything changed. His body shook, his tail wagged wildly. A sound escaped his throat. Not quite a bark, not quite a cry. He ran, slid slightly on the floor, leaped gently onto the bed. The old man wrapped his arms around him and cried openly, unashamed. I knew you'd wait. Whispered, I knew you wouldn't leave. Milo pressed his head into the man's chest. He was home. The old man woke up slowly at first. He didn't understand where he was. The world felt blurry, cold and warm at the same time. Then he felt a steady warmth pressed against his side. A slow, gentle movement, breathing. He turned his head with effort. The dog was still there, curled beside him, its body stretched along his back, one paw resting lightly on his arm, as if afraid he might disappear if it moved. The man tried to speak. Nothing came out. His throat burned, his chest ached, but the dog noticed it, lifted its head instantly. Ears alert, eyes wide, it leaned closer, pressing its nose gently against the man's hand. The man felt tears roll down his cheek. You stayed, he whispered. Barely audible, the dog's tail moved once, slow, careful footsteps. echoed in the distance voices. Someone shouted another voice, answered the dog, didn't move away. It stayed exactly where it was, until hands reached down, until a blanket was placed over the man, until someone gently touched the dog's shoulder. Easy. Buddy, we've got him. The dog finally stepped back. Just enough. The man was lifted onto a stretcher as they wheeled him away. He turned his head again, panic flashing across his eyes. Don't leave him, he said. Please. One of the paramedics nodded. We won't. The dog watched as the stretcher disappeared for the first time in days. It was alone again, but it didn't run it. Sat down right there on the sidewalk, staring in the direction the man had gone. Minutes passed, then longer. Someone approached with a leash. The dog backed away. Another tried to offer food. The dog ignored it. It stayed. Waiting hours later, a car stopped. A woman stepped out slowly. She knelt down in front of the dog. Careful not to scare it. I heard about you, she said softly. The dog tilted its head. She held up her phone on. The screen was a photo. The man on a hospital bed, alive. The dog stood up instantly. He asked about you, the woman said, voice breaking. He said you saved his life. The dog didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone. Later that day, the dog walked through automatic hospital doors for the first time, but when it reached the room, the man smiled and recovered slowly. Doctors said he wouldn't have survived that night alone, because the quietest heroes never make a sound at all.